morning, everybody. So this work is hot off the press. So I'm going to move through it quickly and would love to hear your thoughts afterwards. And if you have other thoughts, to email me afterwards, because I'm kind of struggling with what's most interesting here. So here's my motivation for this. Yesterday, I gave a talk on some work I've been doing with Duke co-authors. And the main punchline of that talk was, we've got all this great sparkling technologies, but whether they're going to get implemented or not depends on frontline workers. And so what development teams need to do is increase value for those who are working on the front lines if they really want to see AI function. And we've seen this again and again where we have all this great AI, but actually it's not getting used by the end users. So I have, here are what we found, here are the tactics you can use. But even when we know the tactics, development teams really struggled to use those tactics to increase value for end users. And that's kind of the starting point for today. So I've got 5 case studies at Duke of AI solutions. Let me talk about the first 2 just to give you a feel. So one of them is, they're all 5 are for ER clinicians and their decision support tools. So one is to help detect sepsis in the ER. And the idea is that if we can detect patients at high risk of sepsis, then we can do this rapid ordering of the blood tests and medications, and we can kind of prevent some of the downstream progression of sepsis. Another example of pulmonary embolism, if we can identify here patients of low risk of pulmonary embolism, then we can divert those patients to an outpatient setting and save valuable hospital space for patients who have more serious PE. So the other 3 things, just in the interest of time, I won't go through, but it's 3 more decision support tools for ER clinicians to use. So in all 5 cases, development teams attempted to accomplish user-centered development, by which I mean they tried to figure out which problems are most important to users. What do users think are about treatments? Do users find these useful? And can users integrate these into their daily work according to judgments by the users? What do we know about user-centered development? So we've got a lot of studies recently about implementing AI solutions or other kinds of technology solutions. So in some cases, developers unintentionally exclude end users, but in some of these more recent studies, we're seeing that a key problem is differences between developers and end users in expertise, in meaning, and interest, and that makes it difficult for them to really engage in user-centered design. Also, these tools are opaque. When does it occur? One way it occurs is if there's brokers between the developers and the end users. And how does it occur? Through this back and forth tuning process, through repair, mutual learning, brokerage, interrogation. So that's kind of recent studies on how we might see user-centered development. But it turns out there's also older literature on user-centered development and participatory design, which talks about how one of the problems is that sometimes technology developers do want to do it, but managers have different interests and they're more powerful, and they don't allow the developers to do it. And so the things that work in this case are things that kind of boundary objects that represent user interests, like prototyping, mock-ups, wireframes, these kinds of things. So this is what we would expect to find. And the theoretical puzzle in my setting is that they had these things that you're supposed to have to accomplish user-centered design, yet I still see variation across these 5 cases in how well they were able to accomplish user-centered design. So how can we explain that? Methods is doing these 5 case studies, interviewing developers and users, other stakeholders, doing observational work, using archival data, and comparing this. So I'm going to go quickly through this. What I want to tell you is they were matched case studies on the things we would expect to find. So they were matched in terms of, there was different expertise between developers and end users. There was different meanings and techniques. There were different interests between developers and end users. The tools were opaque. All these challenges were there, but they were there across all 5 cases. So that can explain the difference. They were also matched on known facilitators of user-centered design. Again, quick presentation, I'm not going to go through it, but in all cases, they use these things that we've heard and, just this iterative development, back and forth, mutual learning. This group at Duke is just great, embedded in the setting, does a lot of work back and forth between the developers and end users. Yet there's this variation in degree of user-centered design. So a couple things that seem to be at play here, and this is where this is like raw early stage. So in all cases, there were these downstream specialists who had asked for the tool in the first place. It wasn't the ER clinicians in any of these 5 cases that wanted the tool. It was always downstream specialists. So an example is, it was the ICU cardiologists who wanted the ER clinicians to discharge the low-risk patients to low-risk PA patients to the outpatient setting. And so they came to the developers and they say, you know what, give us a tool, AI is predictive, give us a tool that helps predict which patients are going to be low risk versus high risk so that the ER clinicians can intervene earlier in the process. And the people asking for the tool were also higher status than the ER clinician. So on all these status characteristics, they were specialists versus generalists, free agents versus salaries. You can read down in terms of their identities, the sites. The specialists are working in these clean, more quiet settings versus the front stage, dirty setting of the ER. So like in every case, the specialists are higher status inside the hospital. And they have different goals than the end users' goals. So the end users in the ER really want to quickly triage patients, and the third-party professionals want different things. Again, I don't want to go into the details because this is a short presentation, but I do want to point out that in the literature, there's a lot about differences between developers and end users. And what I'm seeing really be important here is differences between these powerful third parties and the end users. And another thing that's going on here is that the technology, let's see, sorry. This is going forward instead of backwards. What do I do? Thanks. Yeah, I'll just do it here. Okay. Technology developers also were peripheral experts. They weren't all powerful in organizations. And so this is different than I'm thinking of like the Pacitti study where these technology developers just ruled the roost and the top managers love them. In this case, they're peripheral in this organization. And so there's a literature on peripheral experts. And what we know from this is in order to get their job done, they have to win the support of these people in the core roles. And they often fail to do that. And indeed, that's what attention was in this setting is the developers really wanted to focus on the end user needs, but they had these powerful experts with different interests. And so they had different goals than the powerful experts, the developers. They also had this kind of unclear mandate for focusing on end users, and they lacked formal authority. So just again, I'm just showing you down the side. You've already seen the top here. Their unclear mandate was that they were supposed to kind of out in the world, we want to focus on end users and we want to do human-centered AI, but it's kind of ambiguous and it's not like a real strong mandate. And then inside the hospital, they didn't have authority. They were a cost center and the specialists are the ones who are bringing big money into the hospital. But these challenges are similar across cases. So yes, this is all interesting, but that's still not the key thing that explained the difference. So what did? Something I'm calling power sharing artifacts, and there were 3 kinds: commitment devices, material scripts, and penalty devices. So commitment devices are things where they require the third parties to make an upfront commitment, and I'll tell you in a minute an example of this. But the idea is that they make a public commitment and then they feel obligated to then respect end user needs later. So 3 kinds of commitment devices. First, developers require the third parties to be part of a public presentation to the top managers that included the user problem definition. So in the case of PE, This public presentation included the fact that ER clinicians were worried that if they discharged the patients to an outpatient setting, the patients wouldn't get timely care. So that was like in a presentation to top managers. The third parties are agreeing, yes, we know that's an important problem. Also, they made them include KPIs, key performance indicators from the end users. Here, the end users really wanted to make sure that they measured how good the outpatient care was if they did do this discharge. And then finally, they included these process flow charts that showed that the third parties needed to contribute to the solution, in this case, by providing that outpatient care. Again, I know I'm going through it fast, so this is just to kind of hopefully whet your appetite. Material scripts, let me tell you what I mean by this, but these material scripts kind of restricted third parties from kind of trampling on the end users. One was the developers required these data artifacts. So one example is they required the cardiologist, the specialist, to do a data quality report to make sure that the data allowed ER clinicians to make decisions real time. So there was a lot of data that could have been used here, but in order to be useful to the ER clinicians, they really needed to have real-time data, and this data artifacts help with that. Another thing, they had a silent launch process. So let me just use a sepsis case here. I probably shouldn't have, I shouldn't have done this in my examples, but let me just give you sepsis quickly. Here's sepsis. Patient comes into the ER. If they're suspected of sepsis, they need to go be delivered a sepsis bundle with like 1 million different things that have to be done. So what they did in this case to make this user-centered was they had like a third party getting this alert who would then help the ER clinicians deliver the sepsis bundle. And so one thing during the silent launch they realized is that helpful support staff that was helping shouldn't be interrupting ER clinicians in the middle of resuscitation. So just the idea is like silent launch was an important part here. And then finally, the tool itself inscribed certain things that the support team would do. So there were material artifacts which helped kind of almost force a focus on the end users. And then finally, penalty clauses, which are things built in that kind of prevent shirking. So like they committed to certain things up front. Now let's try to help prevent them from now not following through on these things. So they required the use of what economists call a hostage, where in order to do the project, the cardiologist had to put an operational lead. So this is like a real clinician on the project, not some academic cardiologist who wants a paper. They made sure there were particular milestones. So like, if you don't hit this milestone, then we're going to stop the project. And then finally, they wanted to make sure that there weren't outside parties offering similar tools that then would distract them. Yep. And so they had a clause saying like, if the specialist started talking to other people about developing tools, they needed to inform the developers. In summary, I realize I went through this pretty quick, but what I found is that we had these things that should have helped with user-centered design that didn't really, but the things that did help is things that helped control the powerful third party. These commitment devices where they had to kind of put their reputation on the line up front with top managers promising certain user-centered things. The material artifacts, which afforded the specialists some things and not others, and then this penalty-based discipline. And that's what made the difference between the two cases. So in summary, what I think I'm adding here to the current literature is another barrier is these developers really don't, they're peripheral experts. They may not have control of these powerful third parties. When does it occur with power sharing artifacts? And how does it occur by this trust-based enrolling, affordance-based restricting, and penalty-based disciplining? Thank you.